Welcome to episode 26 of the FLOSS for Science podcast, the podcast about free, libre, and open source software for science. Today, Patrick and I are interviewing Bhavani Ravi about Pandas, a Python data analysis library. Hi, Bhavani. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, thank you, David.
Could you please introduce yourself?
Currently, I'm working as a research engineer with a bunch of researchers, and I move their ML models to consumable products. I also run a bunch of tech communities in Chennai. Notable ones are WomenTechMakers, the one from Google.
You're working mostly on backends for machine learning. What kind of backends are you working on?
So basically, research engineers, all they do is they read a bunch of research papers and come up with ML models. And my company, Saama Technologies, is focused on using these ML models for pharmaceutical companies, basically life sciences. And we have a bunch of data analytics platforms, and all these ML models get integrated into the platform.
Okay. Are you allowed to talk of any specific applications your company is working on?
The broad spectrum of things is once you have a drug ready by the pharmaceuticals, it probably takes around 6 years for the clinical trials to happen and then for it to come to the market. So basically, if someone has a cancer, then the turnaround time for a drug to reach the patient is about 6 to 10 years. So the product primarily focuses on reducing that bunch of time spent on clinical trials, how to fast track them. And this particular area deals with a ton of data. And every time there is a lot of data to deal with, there comes machine learning. So it's pretty awesome.
Okay, like to target specific formulation for new drugs to cure some disease instead of going randomly, like pre-selecting those to allow them only to test those on clinical trials, because the trials are not always successful, so they don't want to waste time and money on unsuccessful drugs or dangerous drugs.
Basically, the drug creation part is pretty easy, and it's already technology has already taken over that part. So the primary focus of our business domain is on the time spent on clinical trials alone, once the drug is ready for people to use.
Okay, how can they accelerate that then? Also, you seem to be involved in the Pandas project. How did you get involved with it?
During my 1 year of complete backend engineering time, I was building this other product called KissFlow. And this is completely away from the life sciences or anything that I've said so far. This was primarily a B2B product, and along with the product came a reporting module. So this is like a Tableau, but completely built in-house for this product. So as a part of the MVP, we were trying out a bunch of all these data analytics tools, and Pandas was one of them, obviously. And when I was doing that, when you actually build a reporting platform, I found a bunch of missing pieces that was a part of Pandas. And I also like reading code a lot. I went ahead and read Pandas code, and it was pretty straightforward for me to make changes. So I just copy-pasted that code, Pandas code, and made changes in-house. And then I later raised issues and actually made the code part of the project.
Okay, so you got an interest in the project by using it quite a bit extensively, and then you started meshing with the community and interacting with them. Okay, yeah, good.
Yeah, because commonly people suggest you to go ahead and just spend a lot of time on the issues, or spend a lot of time on their documentation, or just start with the test cases or something of that sort. But for me, if you kind of use it like a critic, then you would probably find a lot of loopholes, and you can actually volunteer to fix all of them.
Okay. What would be your 1-minute elevator pitch for Pandas?
If you have a lot of data and if you want to play around with them, visualize them, and come up with interesting insights, then Pandas should be your choice.
Okay. So how do you use Pandas in your daily job?
Okay. So after moving to Saama, which is just 3 months, I kind of do one Kaggle competition every day or every week. So every time I start a Kaggle competition, the first line I ever write is import Pandas as PD. So that's how much I use it. And as a programmer, I also hate Excel. I can never master it. So because I run communities, all the data I get as registrations or anything that I had to do, I'll just load all the data into Pandas and do whatever visualizations I want.
Okay, so you said you import Panda right away when you start a new program, but what does Pandas bring that basic Python lack, and why such a tool is necessary?
When we talk about machine learning, we deal with a lot of data. Again, all these data comes from maybe a database, or in Kaggle, it's pretty much CSV files. And I cannot imagine doing what Pandas does with just pure Python. It's going to take me a ton of time initially. That's number one. And Pandas also has, because I work with the code base, every small code change that you do goes through like 9 steps in their pipeline. And they have rigorous test cases written, and it's highly maintained. And the code standards are like, it took me about 6 months to get my single piece of code in. So they have such high standards. If that is available, I would never imagine implementing what Pandas does directly in Python. It would be like re-implementing the wheel.
Okay, so it accelerates your development workflow to use Pandas instead of writing the basic lines to redo this when it does, and it's reduced a lot of errors in your final product.
Exactly. It's fast, easy, and very straightforward to use, and their APIs are also extensively documented. So, yeah, big fan of Pandas here.
Okay, so you mentioned that one of the application of Pandas is to prepare data sets for machine learning algorithms. Can you explain to our users what kind of manipulations are necessary to use data sets for machine learning, or what do you have to do to make these data sets prepared for machine learning algorithms?
That completely depends on the kind of data we are dealing with. I have never worked with image. I have worked pretty much on numerical and textual data. So there are like minimal starting things that you would do. If it's text, you would probably use word to vector or something of that sort to convert all your words into numbers. And if it's of categorical data, then you go through a bunch of encoding techniques. If it's a binary category, then you go for binary encoding or one-hot encoding or feature hashing of that sort. So it completely depends on data. And when it comes to data transformation, Pandas is pretty straightforward. All you have to write is your data transformation logic in a Python function, and then use dataframe.apply, and it's just one line does the magic.
Okay, so we looked at the Pandas webpage, and Pandas claims to provide high performance, easy to use data structures and data analysis tools. Can you elaborate on the high performance aspect, since Python is not known to be performant due to its interpreted nature?
I'm not sure if the interpreted nature would be a problem here, but Pandas primarily is in-memory data structure. So the volume of data that you can handle is pretty much dependent on, directly proportional to the amount of memory you have. And of course, it becomes a problem when you exceed beyond a few gigabytes of data. You can't load all of them into your actual RAM. So there are a bunch of pipelining techniques that you can do, and there are a bunch of slicing and dicing you need to do to, actually make use of the whole data. And I haven't explored that part, but there are like Spark pipelines that you can use along with Pandas to get things running in production systems.
Okay. And so, as you mentioned, the amount of data you can load is really limited to your memory of the computer. So what kind of data formats can be loaded to Pandas?
It is pretty much straightforward to load anything from CSV to directly loading your data from SQL or Excel files. So those are pretty straightforward. And I have also worked with MongoDB for quite some time, when the reporting modules database come from MongoDB. And they don't have Pandas doesn't have a straightforward support to MongoDB as such, but loading data using PyMongo, which is the MongoDB library for Python, and then into Pandas is not more than 5 lines. So
would it be difficult to extend this functionality to a new file format? For example, if you have some simulation files from ParaView or something like this?
I never looked at one such file. So
okay, but would it be complicated to load a different file format, or would I have to write a lot of lines of codes, or is it easy, straightforward to do if I have the data in Python, or would I have to be careful to convert data, or what could be some pitfall to do this?
Okay, anything that you have as a Python dictionary or a list, you can pretty much load that into Pandas or even JSON for that matter.
Okay, as long as I can have a JSON file or a Python data structure of my own file format, it's easy to go.
Yeah.
Okay. What kind of data structures are provided by Pandas?
It's just two. One is called the series. It's very similar to a Python list. And the second one is data frames. And data frames are a collection of series. So each row in a data frame is, the analogy would be tables. And each row in a data frame is constructed of series, and all of these are heterogeneous. So one can have an integer, another can have a string.
Okay, so it's pretty similar to the data frame in R in its structure. Okay, good. Can you inform us about the different data analysis tools provided by Panda?
Sure. So it internally has things to visualize and group data, and you can also perform a bunch of operations on it, like calculate your mean or variance, or if you have any custom functions, you can just write that function in a Python as a Python function and then just apply it to one of the cells or rows or columns.
Okay. But for example, if I want to do machine learning on this data sets, I would have to use a different library like scikit-learn, or how would this work?
For machine learning algorithms, of course, you have to use sklearn or anything of that sort. But for analyzing your data or performing a bunch of statistical operations, Pandas is good enough to report good.
So, and is it easy for scikit-learn to use this data structures from Pandas, or do I have to convert it back to pure Python data structures, or can, for example, scikit-learn use these data structures from Pandas?
Once you have the data structures loaded and transformed into Pandas, using it in scikit-learn is pretty straightforward. You don't have to do any transformation at all.
Okay. And can I use, for example, matplotlib to do plotting, or is Pandas using matplotlib, or how is plotting done of this data?
Yeah. So I don't know. During my initial days of Pandas, I had to use matplotlib. I'm not sure when they actually integrated it, but now Pandas comes with its own. It has integrated matplotlib, and it has its own way of drawing the plots, and it's very straightforward. You don't have to learn yet another library. Right? Once you have the data frame, you pretty much choose which rows goes to the x-axis, which column goes to the y-axis, and it just gives you what charts you want.
Okay.
We do have support for Python version 2 coming really soon, actually being passed on January 1st. A lot of code may have been written with Python 2 in mind, probably in the Panda code, or a lot of people using Pandas maybe have code in version 2. Can you elaborate on the transition to code for version 3 of Python? Like, was there a big transition in Pandas to go from version 2 to version 3? And if someone has code in version 2 of Python, how hard is it to migrate that code with Pandas in version 3, or has the syntax being kept the same along the way?
I've used Pandas primarily on Python 3, so I'm not sure how it's actually in Python 2. And Pandas also said they're going to stop support for Python 2 from Jan 1st. And there are also a lot of issues in GitHub saying the difference, something that's working in Python 2 is not there in Python 3. So this is something that's ongoing, I guess. Not sure.
Okay, so the transition to Python 3 for Pandas is not yet completed?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
So do you know of other companies using Pandas, or have you seen companies using Pandas except of the company you were working?
The current company I'm working for is completely using Pandas for all the machine learning purposes, because without that, data loading is going to be a nightmare. And any research that we do, like I said, any Jupyter notebook that you open will have pandas in it. So that's how ingrained it is.
Do you know if your company is contributing back to Pandas, for example, donating money to them, or are you allowed to work on new features for Pandas? And if you develop this feature, are you allowed to contribute it back to the open source project, or does your company do anything in this regard?
Absolutely. One of the reasons they hired me was because of the Pandas contribution, and we didn't have a formal interview or anything. I just walked in and showed my Pandas code, and they were like, okay, that's it. The interview is over, and here is your offer. So they are pretty open to contributing to Pandas or any open source library for that matter. And we have people contributing to PyTorch or TensorFlow, all that.
Okay. So what about universities? Have you seen that universities are using Pandas for teaching, or have you used during your studies Pandas in university?
Unfortunately, universities in Chennai or I don't know, India, or that evolved for that matter. But students are exposed to Pandas a lot via community work, like GDG, Google Developer Group, or there are like a lot of Python groups in Chennai, which expose them day in and day out to a bunch of Python tools. But universities, it will take some time for them to incorporate all these new technologies into their curriculum.
Can you recommend an easy tutorial for our audience to start with Pandas?
Okay, this is something I can actually do because I've been trying to learn Pandas for quite some time before I actually started learning it. And the biggest problem with learning Pandas is not its syntax or not what it can do. The biggest problem is understanding the data. So the first thing you should do to understand Pandas is know your data. If you have maybe your grocery list or your students' data structure or your sales data or something like that, understand the data completely. Once you have the data in hand, then you might want to do a bunch of things with that, like doing some transformations or finding the mean or plotting a graph. So that was the biggest problem for me. So the moment I figured out how to play around with data, what my data is and how to play around with that, things became pretty easy. My favorite two articles are from DataQuest and Analytics Vidya. So they have pretty much covered end to end of Pandas, and Pandas documentation is itself pretty extensive for you to get started. And a bit of self-promotion here, I also wrote a 4-part series on getting started with Pandas using use cases. So I take an existing data set and walk you through what that data is and how do you perform a bunch of operations using Pandas.
Good. Can you send us the link? We'll include them in the blog post.
Sure, definitely.
Okay, perfect. Do you know of any book available about Pandas?
No, I never used book to learn Pandas, so
okay.
I would not recommend any.
Do you know on what other Python libraries does Panda depend on? Is there any dependencies? You mentioned initially Matplotlib was kind of integrated within Panda. Is there other libraries that are imported at the same time when you import Pandas?
Pandas is built on top of NumPy, the numerical Python library. So that's kind of goes hand in hand. And top of that, for date handling, they use Python dateUtil and PyTC.
Okay, so let us talk a little bit about the community behind Pandas. So what is the main communication channel within the project?
Primarily anything that's around, raising an issue or proposing a new feature, everything happens in GitHub issues. And on top of that, we also have an email list where all the code developers kind of make the big decisions. You can pretty much subscribe to it and basically have a hand on what's going on behind the scenes. Things like where the community is going or what happens to Pandas when Python 2 goes out of its way. Things like that happen in that email chat. And they also have a monthly call where these discussions actually happen over a call.
Okay. And as far as I understood, you contributed to Pandas. So how was it for you to contribute? Was it difficult? Was it complicated to get your pull request merged? Was the community really helpful? Or can you explain what you had to do to get your pull request into Pandas?
Okay. Pandas was my first ever open source contribution. And the moment I raised a request, raised an issue and said, I want to actually write the code to close this issue, they were pretty open about it. They were like, just go ahead and do it. And all it took me was just one weekend to push the code into the repo. But they have a very strict process on the quality of code, the kind of documentation that goes into it, naming of the variables. And like I said, the pipeline is actually 8 steps of testing, right from your commas to actual test cases. You have to have certain amount of coverage and all that. So it took me about 3 months of on and off part-time work to actually get my code in. But that was an extensive learning experience because the importance of quality of code, the importance of pushing everything to the right standard, I learned a lot from that. And people were constantly giving comments after comments, patiently helping you to improve along the way. And it was the best experience.
Okay.
Which skills would be required to contribute to the project? You submitted Python code. What other programming languages are used within Pandas? Is there like C libraries underneath to accelerate some stuff? Is there translation? What other needs is there for Pandas itself?
I think there are pieces that are written in C, but I'm not sure about it. But my code was pretty much on Python, and just by knowing Python well, you can pretty much contribute to a lot of places in Pandas.
Okay, so it's mostly Python code.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a list of easy first-time bug fixes for new users who may want to contribute to the project?
Every issue in GitHub is kind of tagged as and when they come in, and we have a list of good first issues. And the community in itself is very supportive for first-time contributors. They know you are a first-time contributor, and they kind of make everything easy for you. So good first issues and community is what's going to make things happen for you.
Okay, so it's quite open to new contributors in that sense.
Do you know if there are any other tasks where not much programming is involved, like translating documentation or helping to write documentation? Or could anyone who is not really firm in Python contribute to this project?
Absolutely. So Pandas also has these things called Python sprints, which happens both offline and online, where the whole idea is to bring people in to contribute in whatever ways they can. And I was also part of one of those online Python sprints. And the main task was to, setting up a website or writing your pipeline scripts or fixing up the documentation, all of that sort. So there is a bunch of things that happens beyond code, and if you're interested, absolutely, the doors are always open.
Okay.
Now we would like to switch to a slightly lighter topic. What is your vision about FLOSS and the importance for the industry? Do you think companies should use open source software, or they should not use open source software?
Since I'm working with a lot of engineers, there's like enormous amount of talent pool. And I also have friends in civil or mechanical engineering from that aspects, but because of open source, it has like opened up a lot of doors for us to explore software and see what it is without spending a lot of money. And I think that's what makes this industry what it is today. We would not be having this podcast if not for that. So I think the industry should be open to it, and also let their developers spend time on giving back to this community.
Okay. Do you think that using FLOSS software can have negative impacts?
I don't see any.
Okay.
We're almost done with the interview, and we'll proceed with some of our classic quick questions. In recent years, what do you think was the most notable scientific discovery from your point of view?
The black hole picture was top-notch because I had to no longer sell people on what is the importance of Python.
Good one. What is your favorite text processing tool?
Text processing and machine learning?
In any sense of the term, because text processing could be grep, could be LaTeX, could be Word, could be Nano, could be Emacs, could be... Okay.
So text processing, as in from the document point of view, is I pretty much used Google Docs in and out. As a text processing for machine learning, my go-to things are NLTK or Spacey.
Okay. Is there anything else we forgot to ask you or that we should have known to ask you about?
I'm not sure who are the target audience for the podcast, but if you are beginners and if you are scared of contributing to open source, there's nothing to be scared about. All you have to do is go to the GitHub and say that, some part of the code is missing, and people will just take you through the process of how to make your first contribution. So you're just one GitHub issue away from making your first open source contribution.
Okay. Is there anything else you would like to share with us?
That's it.
Thank you, Bhavani, for your time in this interview. For our listeners, what is the best way to contact you?
I'm pretty much active on every social media out there, so you can find all of them at bhavaniravi.com.
Okay, we'll include the list into the blog post. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This will be all for today's episode of the FLOSS for Science podcast. I hope you enjoyed the interview. You can reach me on Twitter at DLPK.
And you can reach me at _dbrass or both of us at FLOSS for Science. Also, we are on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and Spotify. You can help us by recommending our show to your friends and colleagues.
Our website is on flossforscience.com, where you can find all of our contact informations and a link to our GitHub page, where you can submit subject ideas for future episodes. You can also listen to our episodes or find the RSS feed to get all of our interviews delivered directly to your favorite podcast player. Our current schedule is to release an episode on the first Wednesday of every month. We hope you enjoyed the show and that we will see you all in your next episode. Bye.
Bye.